Eric. I often talk about the fact that I never quite know where I'm going to get my next guest and where I'm going to get my next idea. And as part of the Aspen Ideas Fest this year, I was looking at the roster, and lo and behold, I was reading the bio for Eric Liu, and within that, it talked about the Citizen University. And I thought, I have got to know what this is. I've got to know what the Citizen University is. Because among other things on the show, when we talk about dysfunction and polarization and the system doesn't work, at the end of the day, it's about citizenship. It's about all of us stepping forward, being effective citizens, helping our country be a better place. So I thought we should have a classroom session, this classroom session, on Citizen University. And Jack Liu, our guest today, is the founder of that. And he's a lot more than that, too. He's working on similar efforts for the Aspen Institute, and he teaches civic leadership at Washington University. He's got a very fascinating background, having been part of the Clinton White House, and he writes for CNN as a correspondent with The Atlantic. So this is one of those shows where we're going to take about 7 hours material and try and condense it into about 30 minutes. I'm sure it's going to be a great interview. So, Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
I'm sure I left off half your resume in there somewhere.
You hit what mattered there.
But Citizen University, I love this. I know I love it, and I don't know anything about it. So why do we have it? Why do we need a Citizen University? And thanks to you, why do we have one?
Yeah, well, we need it because for the same reason that this show exists. We're in a period of time right now where our politics is getting more broken and dysfunctional, where economic inequality is at such severe levels that it's really creating a form of political and civic inequality, and people are having a harder and harder time to get their voice out there and to exercise power as citizens. And it's also a time where the baseline demographics of who we are as a country are in such rapid flux, and the basic American question of who is us, what is the kind of unifying sense of nationhood, is really undergoing a shift right now. So for all these reasons, this is as ripe a moment as we've had in a really long time to really look at and unpack again this idea, which can sound sort of 1950s and a little musty, citizenship, right? And to really infuse it with new meaning and new purpose and new spirit. What we do at Citizen University, we're a nonprofit based in Seattle, where I live, but we do work all around the United States, and it's all about teaching the art of powerful citizenship. And every word in that phrase actually matters. It's art, not science. It's not a matter of just a set of techniques and formulas that one can kind of memorize and master. This is an art because this is about humans living in community with other humans and reckoning with one another and the ways that they see one another and the stories that they have about one another, right? But it's powerful citizenship is really important too, because I think one of the things that we try to focus on in our work is democratizing the idea and the understanding of power itself. The word power, the idea of power, is often kind of a negative in American conversation. Power mad, power hungry, power trip. You have this, it's sort of a dirty word. And I think for a lot of different reasons, people often are willfully ignorant about how power in public life and civic affairs actually operates, right? And what we try to do at Citizen University is just to unpack the meaning, the content, the forms, the laws, the behaviors of power and the dynamics of power in civic environments. And I come to that work because a lot of my life and career I've worked in politics and government, in the White House at the highest levels, as a citizen of Seattle and Washington State, where I live. And I've accumulated over my life and career a lot of knowledge about how you get stuff done, how people move things, how people block things. And I feel like it is not okay for me simply to hoard that knowledge, to apply it for myself or for my favorite ends or for my favorite friends. That the point of having that kind of experience and knowledge in a moment like this is to share it, and that's what we do.
So is it a learning tool?
So we have a variety of different programs. One track, I suppose, is creating content that really is learning content. It's not K-12 classroom curriculum, but it's more, we've got a partnership going, for instance, with TED. I gave a TED talk on this topic of civic power that got published in 2014 and went globally viral. Partly, I mean, it was a fine talk. I felt like I did an okay job, but more because, again, we're in this moment where I think people were hungry to get more literate in power. When we did that talk and it had that viral response, we realized, okay, there's more to do here. So now we're working with TED Ed, which is their education arm, and creating a series of animated videos that really just, again, in the most basic ways, talk about the elements of power in civic life and how it operates and how you as an average person, average American citizen or not, whatever your documentation status might be, how you can become more fluent and literate in power. So one track of what we do is creating content like that. Some of it is video, some of it is writing. Another track is we essentially create learning experiences, conferences, convenings of different kinds, and we bring together activists, civic leaders and entrepreneurs, educators, catalysts from politics to come together and share what they know and share how they do what they do. People who've been or will be guests on this show as well, people like Joan Blades, who had co-founded MoveOn.org, and now with colleagues on the right has founded an initiative called Living Room Conversations, getting cross-partisan dialogue going. People like Ai-jen Poo, the founder of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, organizing often these low-wage immigrant women of color who are doing domestic work so that they have voice and civic clout. People like that we bring together not only to learn from one another, but to share what they know to a wider audience, so that if you're someone like you who is a leader in a community and has a spark of initiative and wants to make stuff happen like this show, you can come and actually get exposed to other innovative civic leaders. And the same is true of anybody watching this show. By definition, there's somebody who's curious and interested in wanting to be part of something greater than themselves. So we try to create experiences that tap into that.
So you mentioned you did this TED production and it's viral and it's out there, whatever out there means. Who is your audience in this sense? Do you have any idea who's paying attention to Citizen University?
Well, we think about audiences in kind of, as you sort of might in politics or a campaign. There are different audiences to speak to. In our convening and organizing work, we often will do convenings for, say, veterans communities or immigrant communities or youth activists or people from faith communities. And we will tailor different dimensions of this message about get literate in power to the concerns and the preoccupations of that particular community. I think there's a general sense, age-wise, we're speaking more to, we're not speaking to kids necessarily. We are speaking more to people who are either adults or are already a bit aware of the wider world. But I think our goal ultimately is to set off contagions, right? We're not trying to be, we're not going to be Earth's single source for civic knowledge. But what we can do is create and curate great content and experience that will become contagious, that will lead people to take these conversations and these ideas about civic power back home, back to their communities, back to their affinity groups, and spread this. Because the goal ultimately is for us in the United States just to have a more robust, revived culture of citizen participation.
And democracy, is not a spectator sport, right?
That's right. And look, I obviously come from the left. I've worked for Democrats, and living in Seattle, I've been very involved on progressive issues like helping our city pass a $15 minimum wage and helping our state pass a system of universal background checks on gun purchases. So, I put my political cards on the table. But I also say very explicitly, all our work is cross-partisan. All our work is about, we partner a lot with folks on the right, whether they are Tea Party activists or establishment conservative institutions. If you believe that we're in a time right now where citizens need to redevelop their citizen muscle, basically, then our work is for you. And there are people both on the left and the right, people coming out of the $15 Now movement, people coming out of the Tea Party, who recognize that this is an interesting moment right now, where it's not just about a few establishment powers that be calling the shots and running and rigging the game. It's about people claiming and voice and saying, let's rewrite the rules of the game, again, from left or right. And our goal is to really just engage that spirit wherever you can find it.
And actually on the show here, we talk about dysfunction and polarization, and they're bad. But as I've also said on the show, they're bad in the extreme that we find them now. They're not unexpected. And to make democracy work, you should start with a certain element of polarization, and then you should bring people to the middle to solve problems. But we're not doing that right now.
Well, I think there's a variety of things to address polarization. And I make a real distinction between bipartisanship and cross-partisanship. So bipartisanship I think of as what you just said, which is bring people to the middle, right? You're from the left, you're from the right. Let's kind of figure out how you can compromise, and you each give a little bit on what you believe or what your stances are, and you compromise somewhere in something you might think of as the center, right?
Right.
That's bipartisanship. But there's also an approach that is getting more traction right now, which is cross-partisanship, and that is people from the left for very principled reasons, and people from the right for very principled reasons, each realizing that their principles happen to converge on an axis of action right now, right? So the front and center example of that today is criminal justice reform.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? You got people who, they're not compromising, they're not watering down anything. You have social justice liberals who have long believed that the prison industrial complex is a racist abomination. And you have limited government conservatives and libertarians who have also long believed that that same prison industrial complex is big government run amok, right? Each of them, for their own reasons, is kind of coming together and finding a realization that, hey, together we can unwind and roll back some of this prison state, right? And roll back mandatory minimums and roll back just the mindset of incarceration above all else. Cross-partisan opportunities, you need both. You need a spirit of bipartisanship where it's possible, because a spirit of compromise in a diverse, multicultural, multi-point of view society is absolutely necessary for things to work, right? And DC is broken because people believe in a fantasy that you can have final victory, right? That if you just hang on hard enough and block the other side, that eventually the other side will go away and you can have your way forever. That's not how it works in real life, right? And so there is a place for that bipartisanship, but I also think there are interesting and increasing opportunities for cross-partisanship too.
So you're widely traveled in the political world, and again, you write a bit, and you get around. Was there a moment or a sequence of moments that just said to you, I got to jump in here, I got to do something?
If you roll it all the way back, it has a lot to do with just my family formation. I'm the son of immigrants. My parents were born in China, went to Taiwan, came to the United States. And as a second-generation American, I think I have a very second-generation view of the world, which is I believe that everything I have here is a birthright, just like anybody else born in the United States. But because the experience of immigration is so recent in my family, I'm super aware that I should take nothing for granted, that every single opportunity I might have, because I simply had the dumb luck to be born in the United States, creates an equal or greater obligation to, in a sense, earn it. I didn't do a thing to earn it, right? I had the dumb luck to be born in upstate New York, go to decent public schools, go to good colleges, and so on and so forth. And yeah, I've worked hard all my life, but there's this incredible inheritance of a stable and inclusive society that preceded me. And if I'm going to earn everything I started out with, I've got to pass that on, right? So that's a mindset that in an immigrant family like ours was sort of in the water, right? Then the next kind of signal moment, of course, was just a college education. And I went to Yale College, and there's a Harkness Tower, which is the famous kind of Carillon bell tower in the middle of campus, has at the base of it inscribed, carved there in marble, Nathan Hale's second most famous quote. So Nathan Hale was Yale class of 1773.
Okay.
All right, his most famous quote is, "I regret that I had but one
Right,
life to give
right.
for my country." His second most famous quote, written in a letter to one of his commanding officers, I think, as he accepted what would become his fatal spy mission, was, "I wish to be useful."
Okay.
Those words, "I wish to be useful," Nathan Hale, class of 1773. You know, you walk past that, you look at that, and again, as a second generation American, feeling this sense of, I'm connected to that, right? I will in fact claim that. And to be lucky enough to get an education like I got at a place like Yale means that my job now isn't to hoard that knowledge and learning and the opportunities that come from it. My job is to be useful, right? To apply that knowledge in the service of a greater good and of others. From there, it's why I just drifted toward wanting to serve do public service. So I went into government after college. I went to Washington. I worked on Capitol Hill. I worked for President Clinton. Those were all formative experiences in terms of understanding how power works and all the stuff we've been talking about. But the last signal moment, I would say, is 15 years ago in the year 2000 when I moved to Seattle. After the Clinton administration had ended, I moved to the other Washington, and which I'd always been drawn to just viscerally, just the beauty and the spirit and the kind of entrepreneurial culture of Seattle. And, you know, having grown up on the East Coast, but working in D.C., not as a real citizen of D.C., but part of the company town, right, of D.C., my years in Seattle have been truly my first true adult opportunity to live like a citizen, to be part of a community, to contribute to that community, to have a voice and a say in that community. And I've done that a great deal, and I've been mentored by a lot of people who have shaped Seattle over the decades and gotten different communities, whether they're communities of color or other communities involved and active in the political and civic mainstream. And that's shaped me tremendously in this feeling of, for as broken as national politics is, and it can make you depressed and feel like things are all, you know, dysfunctional and you just want to say none of the above, in local politics still, it is possible to make an impact, to get involved, to make an impact that you can feel. It is possible in a city, especially in the West, here in Colorado, in Washington State, more so than in East Coast cities where, you know, it's a bit more about hierarchy and dues paying and credentials and everything else. You can show up and you can arrive and you can decide, I want to contribute something. Before you know it, you can start a TV show. Before you know it, you can start a citizens initiative on guns or on something else. And before you know it, you can just be involved. And the culture of citizen participation in Seattle has probably been the most recent big formative force for me.
So it's a great story, and now you have all these puzzle pieces, you put them together, you have this citizen university. What is success? If you look back a year from now or 5 years from now, what will have meant to you to have said, I was a success?
Well, before I directly answer that question, let me tell you about another important piece of the work that I do.
Sure.
Because it's very relevant to an Aspen community. So I recently launched a program at the Aspen Institute on citizenship and American
I was going to
identity.
get to that next, but let's combine them.
Okay, yeah.
Because obviously you're linking them in your mind, so I'll link them for the show.
And they're very connected. I mean, so this Aspen Institute program on citizenship and American identity. And, you know, these two pieces, Citizen University and this program at the Aspen Institute, complement each other in that Citizen University's work is a lot of grassroots working with different communities and constituencies on, like I said, democratizing understanding of power, right? The Aspen Institute program is about actually engaging the tools of power with the people who are in a position to shape culture, to shape the frames of narrative, to shape our political discussion. And a lot of what we're doing there are projects to really change the narratives about citizen empowerment and change the overarching narratives about who we are as a people, right? And to do that by working with folks in the media, by working with creators and artists in creative industries, by working, of course, with leading civic activists from around the country. But you know, the Aspen Institute is this unique national platform that brings together leading catalysts and innovators. And if you can capture some of that energy in service of creating a new story in this country, around the meaning of citizenship. That, you know, to use kind of a football metaphor, there's an air game and a ground game, right? A lot of Citizen University is the ground game. This work we're doing at the Aspen program is the air game, to kind of create the overarching frames of dialogue and conversation and culture. And so, to more directly answer your question about what is success, there's a ground component and there's an air component, right? The ground component is simply more levels of more kinds of participation by more people, right? It's not just voting. Of course, I want to see voter turnout go up across the board demographically. But it's also volunteering. It's also citizen engagement of other kinds. I have colleagues at an organization called NCOC, the National Conference on Citizenship, based in DC, and they do this report called the Civic Health Index, where they've taken a bunch of measures like voter registration and voting turnout, volunteering, but also things like neighborliness and relationships, outside of your own initial circle. And they kind of tally up these metrics and measure the civic health of different cities around the United States, right? So some of this is intangible, but some of this is quite measurable through measures like that, right? And that's on the ground. And so in 5 years, if we've moved the dial significantly on all those measures of citizen engagement, that's progress. In the air game, that's harder to measure, but it's a matter of culture and values, right? I often use the language of civic religion, right? I really do believe in the United States, a country that has no unifying bloodline or religion, that we are bonded together by a shared civic creed, a creed that you can find in charter documents like the Declaration and the preamble to the Constitution and I Have a Dream speech and the Gettysburg Address and so forth. And you know, that creed constitutes something like a religion. And you know, for me personally, I was not raised in any formal spiritual church religion, but I think about this notion of higher purpose and a set of precepts that are ideals that we are meant to live up to, fail constantly to live up to, and the purpose of our lives as citizens is to try to live up to them better and more often. That notion of civic religion is what this air game is about. And so success would be not unlike what you'd think of if you were in the actual religion business, right? How are people's values changing? If you do surveys of people's norms and attitudes about service, about participation, about compassion and generosity, about whether to be cynical or engaged, in politics, about whether you believe that the game is so rigged that there's no point, or the game is rigged but you can actually unrig it. You know, these values and beliefs, they will be the measure of success on the air game. And if we can change norms and values and the stories that people have in their heads and the mindsets that they have about what it means to actually exercise voice in a community, that will be success. And again, I take no credit for this, but we're in a moment, even the last few weeks and months, it's very turbulent, whether it's around racial turmoil in cities around the country, or the joy that so many have felt around the Supreme Court decision on marriage equality, and that is a culmination of a multi-decade effort of citizen organizing. There is evidence in our face right now in the country that when citizens organize, they can change the frame of things, they can change policy, they can change culture, right? And just the news of our recent times should be enough to start giving you a little bit of hope and moving that air game forward. So,
well, I know we've talked on the show a lot about millennials, and when you look at the demographics, that generation, however they do scoring, is looking to do more of what you're talking about. But I was just alerted the other day that what's after millennials, Z or something, or whatever it is?
Yeah, post-millennials.
That generation, in terms of wanting to give back, it's off the charts. So somewhere along the line, this messaging is resonating.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's coming from a positive end or the negative end, but I think people are starting to wake up to this, the power of the citizenship and
I think that's right.
the value of it.
And I think which is great and encouraging. And the only thing that I want to emphasize, particularly when I talk to younger people, to millennials and younger, is it's not enough only to volunteer, only to do service, only to be philanthropic with your time or resources. You also have to do the thing which to a lot of millennials feels like the dirty thing, which is engage in politics, right? And you got to do so in a way that's not about the quick satisfaction of instant gratification. Voting for President Obama, if that's what you did as a young person in 2008, was a very satisfying feeling on election day. And a lot of young people got dispirited when the world didn't suddenly change overnight and all of Obama's promises weren't kept within the first 100 days, right? And a lot of the same young people who'd gotten involved in that campaign receded and began to check out of politics because of how broken and stuck it can seem or be. My message to them is there is no substitute in the end for engaging in politics. You can make change as a volunteer. You can make change coming up with cool new civic tech apps and platforms for crowdsourcing, philanthropy, and activism. But number one, there's nothing like government for making change at scale. And number two, your responsibility as a citizen means that we have to nurture the spirit of small r Republican citizenship, that we are citizens of a republic. We are not spectators. We are not mere participants in a plebiscite or an occasional referendum. We actually own responsibility for the health of a community, right? And that means owning voting. That means owning what happens after voting. That means pressuring and lobbying the policymakers who either you elected or didn't elect or vote for. And it means engaging in that game, as sordid and as archaic as it may seem. It's there, and it is the locus of a kind of power that matters.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. We talk a lot about that on the show, but we still have such huge gaps. And as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. I'm about the political thing, but I'm sensing we got to get people to start at that local level. We had an election here recently where we didn't have enough people running for the school board, and that's going on across the nation right now. People aren't stepping up to fill that little p political element.
Yep.
How to make the schools better,
Yep.
How to make the hospitals better, how to make the railroads run, how do we get there? How do we bridge that gap? And is what you're doing helping to bridge that gap?
Well, I mean, I think we get there in part by emphasizing what you just said, which is, all politics is local, but also all citizenship is local. And there are a lot of national issues that you can feel as an individual helpless about changing or relatively voiceless or powerless, but you can make a big difference if you get involved at a local level. And, I think part of it is about reminding folks of that. Part of it is about, but not in a eat your vegetables way. Part of it is actually...
But that's good too.
That's sometimes necessary because people do have to be told to eat vegetables. But part of it is also to be told there is no such thing as not voting. Not
Correct.
voting is voting. Not voting is voting to give power to people whose views are often inimical to your own, right? And so there is no such thing truly as checking out. And it's at the local level where checking out and your absence and non-participation has the most immediate and directly tangible impacts on you, and often negative impacts. So, you didn't engage in the school board election, you didn't pay any attention, you didn't try to encourage a smart, active, engaged parent or neighbor to run for the school board. When your schools run into trouble, that you own that, right? And I think part of what there's a precept that I often say, which is that society becomes how you behave, right? There is no, well, I can be apathetic, but somebody else's idealism will cancel out my apathy or make up for it, right? Your apathy, your lack of engagement, your lack of compassion is incredibly contagious, right? And the inverse is true too. If you choose to be active, you choose to be engaged or compassionate, that too is contagious. And there's another way to think about that, which in, again, tangible terms, there's a billboard I once saw that I often talk about by a really congested highway, and the traffic was just like a parking lot. Cars weren't moving. And the billboard said, "You're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic." Right?
Right.
And I think just being reminded of that, government is
I'm
not...
going to steal that line.
Go ahead, steal it will. I didn't make it up, but the government is not a thing over there that you find distasteful or stupid and it's broken and you want to kind of keep your distance from it. Government is us. And you're not stuck in broken politics. You are broken politics. You're not stuck in a system of low participation. You are that, right? And so, you know, each one of us owns a little responsibility for leaning in that way.
Yeah, I always end each show with that cliche, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So the same thing as you are traffic, right?
That's right.
So I always have so much fun with my guests. Time always flies. We're getting signals behind me all this, where we're going to run out of time. Whether it's the ground game or the air game, tell my viewers how they can get involved in Citizen University or through the Aspen Institute, how to find you and how to grab onto what you're doing.
Well, you can come to our website, which is citizenuniversity.us. And there are a lot of channels there, both to the content that I've described, information about the convenings that we do, and ways to get on our mailing list, where we're always circulating stories of people in our broad network that can be inspiring and applicable to you as a citizen wherever you may live. And I think on the air game, kind of the big narrative and the kind of civic religious sense, the thing that I would want to leave with your viewers is think about what you can do in your circle today to slightly change the story about what's possible, to slightly expand your own civic imagination and that of people around you, and not just take as a given what's given, right? And ask, well, why is it that we've always done it this way in our community? Why is it that nobody's ever tried it that way? And I think if all you did was to make an intention that today I'm going to look around and see if there's something I can push against that's one of these givens, and do that in the company of others, that's a great first place to start, because it lays down this pathway of a habit and a practice of expanding your civic imagination.
And I love the word you use throughout. Learn the power of citizenship.
That's right.
That's what it's about.
That's right.
Well, thank you for your time. You're a great guest.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
Maybe we can have you back for a rematch and drill down maybe a year from now and see where you've gone in the last year, particularly what you're doing to impact the election cycle and where you see
let me just say
things
that too.
16.
I mean, in 2016, I think we're going to be doing in the Aspen Institute program a lot, both around these questions of narrative and around voting, and kind of reviving a culture of voting that is participatory and creative and engaging in different ways. So look forward to talking more.
Then 1 year from now, that's what we're talking about.
Okay. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thanks, Eric. You're the best.